Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hack Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Rossie Stone. He's the founder of Dekko Comics. They're educational comics that help learning by turning the school content into comic book form. He graduated with art and art studies from the University of Dundee, and alongside his work with the comics, he runs workshops and gives TED Talks about setting up the comics as well as his experience with dyslexia. You should really check out the comic books, and I'll put a link to the website, as I always do, in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Rossie.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. I'm quite interested to get into this, really. So what I actually thought we'd start with is your interest in comics, and where did that come from first?
Well, essentially, they're based on a revision technique that I used for myself when I was at school.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm dyslexic myself, and I was one of these, common with dyslexia, I struggled with reading. And I know dyslexia is an umbrella term. It can come in various different forms, but mine was very much a difficulty with processing information. So reading it was one thing, listening to it was one thing, but understanding the information as it was coming in was another thing. I described myself as being rubbish with words.
Yeah.
I could read and I knew what words meant, and I don't know how your dyslexia manifests itself, but it's just like you'd get to the end of a sentence and just realize, I don't know what I've just read. I understand the words, but the information hasn't gone in yet.
Yes. Yeah.
But I plugged away at it. I tried and failed. I was at the bottom of the class for most of my school life, and eventually I just got fed up with putting in all this time and putting in all this effort and still getting DCs and fails. I was taught how to use mind maps. They became a mind mess. The highlighting technique, where you'd highlight key points of the text, I would just end up highlighting 90% of the page. If processing information was my difficulty, how was I supposed to find the key points in the first place?
Yes,
Extra time being just more extra time to fail when it came to exams, because it wasn't just a reading speed issue. So, it just, it wasn't just a reading speed issue. It was also just understanding the information itself and what questions were asking me to do. So I just came to the conclusion in my fifth year of high school, 17 years old. Don't know what you call them in England. What were the ones after GCSEs?
Because you're in Scotland, so you're highest. So A-levels.
A-levels, yes. So it was my A-levels exam. I had a modern studies exam, probably the last academic exam, before I could just go focus on art and the rest of my life. And I just remember looking at this pile of revision notes, just thinking of, think of the years before that, when I'd struggled with it, and felt really bad about myself and always been getting low grades. I just thought, look, if I'm going to fail anyway, I might as well enjoy it. And I knew I had never found it difficult to read when it came to a comic. Comics got me into reading. I'd always loved comics. I'd always loved the Beano and the Dandy. And I just thought, what's the worst that can happen? I'll turn a page of my revision notes into a comic strip, see what happens. Instantly, it became more fun to make, as well as more fun to read, because I felt like the information was going into my head in a way it never had before in class. I had visuals and narrative to remember all my points by, and I was always very good at that. I was always good at anything creative or imagination based, and it felt like the information was going in naturally. It felt much less like remembering what happened in the worksheet and more like remembering what happened in an episode of The Simpsons. So I did more of these revision notes, all the while knowing I was going to fail, but I didn't care because I was feeling good about myself for the first time. I was feeling self-esteem. So it was going to be the best fail of my life. But long story short, I ended up getting an A in that exam. So completely unexpected, but it just made me think, wow, that felt like the information was going in, and it seems to have, because I've got a good grade. And I had a great time doing it. Why have I not figured this out before?
Yeah. So your interest really was Beano and Dandy. I was kind of wondering whether you'd be that way or reading like Spider-Man and Batman in your spare time as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I've always just had a weakness for cartoons. I love the exaggeration and the looseness and wackiness of cartoons, whereas I really appreciate the Marvel and DC stuff. But just growing up, it was, I think I just lent too heavily to the cartoon side of things, and they were just that bit too realistic.
I see.
But also is the thing where my dad, had always collected Beano annuals. My brother was always reading the Beano. So there was already a Beano presence in the household. So it's natural that we would go on to that.
Did that also pick up your because you illustrate, don't you? So is that where your interest in illustration also come from?
Yeah. My preferred style is quite close to like classic Beano wackiness, but also two of my biggest inspirations were my brother and my dad. I would often copy my dad's stuff because he was a naturally good illustrator and a cartoonist. And again, I just found them so fun. I found it so fun what you could do with a cartoon face or a cartoon expression. I was always more fascinated with seeing what you could do with an idea of an image rather than try and capture an image in real life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that. And it's interesting, really. So that really it wasn't something you were sat in your room on your own, kind of like trying to copy the Beano. You were really your dad being an illustrator. Did you do that professionally, or was that something you did as a hobby that kind of really got you through to it?
He did study at art college, and he was he was doing freelance illustration for periods of his life, and he still does it a little bit to this day, but his main profession is actually being a film director. He's always been an artistic craftsman in his way, and he's always been a storyteller and a very visual guy.
So didn't fall far from the tree then.
Well, there's 5 children in our family, and we joke, we're all in the arts in one form or another, and we joked that my mom was trying to get one academic in the family and gave up after the 5th.
How many of your siblings are dyslexic? Are you the sort of odd one out, or is it running quite far through your family?
No, I'd say we've got one brother who is, I remember he had a bit of extra time in his exams. Like he either suspected that he had dyslexia or was formally diagnosed. I can't exactly remember.
Okay.
But it was never a huge deal for him. He had to adjust some of his revision techniques and so on, but he scored good grades. He worked hard. He was able to read for fun, and that was never an issue. Whereas I was the only one who seemed to have this real attention problem and reading difficulty. Just like sometimes I've wondered if actually ADHD was closer to what I had, even though I was diagnosed with dyslexia. But but I found it very difficult to read and keep my attention on it and absorb the information as I was reading. I found it very difficult to listen to any kind of class lesson as well, and I was always staring out the window. And I had this real problem with misinterpreting information, both as I heard it and as I read it. And I was the only one in my family who had that, and that's where I kind of stood out. And I was the only one who had problems like this in school. Everyone else was keeping their head fairly well above the water.
Okay. What age was it you actually got picked up as dyslexic?
So it must have been when I was around 11 or 12 years old, because it was my first year of secondary school.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a huge relief off my shoulders when I found out that I had dyslexia. Because I see kids who to this day, they associate it with some sort of shame or embarrassment. And I've never been able to understand that. It was a relief for me because it turned out it was nothing to do with intelligence, nothing to do with, I was always insecure about the fact that what if I'm stupid? Because there's always this sort of looking down on someone aspect associated with stupidity and inferiority implication. And I was hoping that my intelligence would at least come close to average. And it turned out that my intelligence had been above average this whole time, despite, by school standards, being so bad at all the smart subjects. Bottom of the class with maths and English and so on. In my experience, art has never been classified as a smart subject.
No, unfortunately not. It was always, I guess maybe because I'm a dyslexic person too, it's the reprieve subject. Like, hey, I can just go do some fun stuff. Or for me, technology as well, where I can just bolt things together and get it to work. And it's a nice break. But it never quite had the kudos of the other two stuff, did it?
It's kind of confusing in a way because, for me personally, just like I get why school's set up. It's hungover from the Industrial Revolution time where mainstream school as we know it kind of was formed. But, we all accept in the adult world that there's a huge variety of jobs and roles and positions that we all need to fill and we all contribute to the world through. The school seems to be focused mainly on the academia side of things and the written academia side of things. But I've never been able to understand why all other subjects can't be treated as smart and respectfully as the others, you know. And even if you're not as naturally good a reader or not naturally good at maths, you can still get better at that. But you can probably, you know, I found that I was able to get better at that through using what I loved. And if you look down on something like art, you're not exactly being encouraged to explore that, you know, if that's the subject that you thrive in, for example, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you, really. It's, as I say, the reprieve subject to getting a break, but really it's not one. Do you think, yes, I really need to get an A in this? Because that was never kind of pushed, well, particularly where I went to school, wasn't pushed that hard. It was just kind of what we did. Mm-hmm. It was one of the ones I could drop at GCSE level if I wanted to. So, so obviously, clearly we fast forward to you sat at your hire and you did your first comic book to learn a subject. What subject was it you trying to learn? What particular comic strip did you do for that one?
So it was modern studies was the subject. So news and current affairs and all that stuff. And I did a little 2-page comic, which actually featured characters in it that I ended up using for my Dekko Comics series. Okay. As a sort of homage to it. Later in 2016 when I set up Dekko. But yeah, it was these two old men really, just very cartoonily drawn and just bantering the modern studies information back and forth. Almost as if they were arguing with each other. And I had visual cutaways to some of the points where I needed a visual to represent a certain fact to help me remember it and so on. But it was just quite a straightforward story and it was really fun. And it was fun to come up with some of the visual gags. Like there was another comic I made for modern studies where I was having to remember facts about the Scottish cabinet because we learned about obviously the Scottish political system in Scotland. And for one of the visuals I used within the comic, I had the cabinet being represented as literally a filing cabinet with a big band saying SNP wrapped around it. You know, as stupid as that is, and obviously that's not literally what the cabinet is. No. For some reason, that really helped click together what the cabinet actually was. On paper, that just seems like, why are you doing that in such a weird roundabout way? But like for me, it works. You know, the zaniness of it works. The literal imagery compared against the actual meaning, which you can have in writing underneath, is really effective.
Do you know what? Being a visual thinker myself, I've looked at some of your comics, so I can sort of feel the artwork. I've already pinged in my head what the cabinet looks like with its blue SMP stacks around it. Like, oh yeah, I can see it almost like floating and wobbling in the air. I've got it walking around or something.
Absolutely, yeah. And other fun things. There's so much you can do when you start applying not just drawings, but whatever it is you're interested in, whether it's action or whether it's humor, in my case, really simple, daft, childish humor. Like, I had to remember a fact of which party currently held the majority seats at the time of that exam and how many seats the other people held. Now, written in a paragraph of text or so, that's quite a hard thing for someone like me to remember, which one had exactly which number and so on. But for me in the comic, I just had all the leaders of each party running in a race, and they're all holding flags with the number of seats that they hold. So you had Alex Salmond at the front with a big cheesy grin and waving his flag, and the further back you went with the less seats, the more tired the politicians would look. So I had, I think her name was Margaret MacDonald or someone at the time, who represented the Independent Party. She only had one seat, so I had her collapsing, sweating, and waving her flag deeply at the back. I bet you really go to town, and I bet they're proper caricatures of them particular political leaders as well. Yeah, but they're done in today's society. Like
they are
caricatures, partly to be fun and eye-catching and engaging. It's the whole concept of Dekko doesn't come from that comics are the answer. For people who want to learn in other ways, it's that if you look at entertainment and the things that you do for fun, you'll find a lot of very effective ways of communicating and absorbing information. Like for you, engineering and just, in fact, even just the world of cars must be a huge treasure trove for you in terms of how you can make something more interesting for yourself.
Oh yes. You'll find. And I'm sure the listeners are fed up of hearing my various automotive analogies that come out during these conversations. But yeah, I can remember what happened in most years with what motorbikes were released in that year.
That's great, though. And I'd be really, I'm really interested to find out more about, like, how you manifest your passion and how that steered you in your life. But I think one of the lucky things about my life is that something I was passionate about had a very rare moment where it added a whole lot of meaning in an area that I'd been struggling in.
Yes.
And that was quite special, like it's not, I think those are quite rare to come across. So I'm very lucky in that regard.
So you did yours and like, hey, I'm on something here. Did your classmates start looking over your shoulder and like, hey, that works? Or where did it shift from this works for me to this works for other people, therefore I can make a business out of it?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, first of all, my classmates, I'd gone through the experience that I'm sure a lot of your viewers and people who've spoken with about their dyslexia story have gone through the period where you get known as the stupid kid, and you're trying to divert. Oh yeah. Where you're trying to divert that attention. You don't want that unwanted attention. I've even heard of some people with dyslexia trying to become a bully to divert that attention away from themselves. And no, that never happened with me. But at the same time, I tried to hang out with crowds that I just shouldn't have. Several points trying to avoid that unwanted attention. Anyway, the point is that I was well known for being rubbish at everything except art. Right. And people always saw my cartoons. They thought they were amazing. And so that was always a source of self-esteem. And also, like, respect for me actually really began to change when I also started doing drama and like school plays and later on in my school life. And people saw that I could act as well, and I could act actually quite okay. And so that's, very, as an aside for anyone listening, I'd say, if you know anyone who's struggling through the insecure years of high school, I think confidence is the biggest knocker for dyslexia. It's not actually the difficulties it brings in class. So if you can indulge in the things that you like, make you feel good and are good at, and make a few friends within those circles, your natural self-respect starts coming up, and the natural respect of people around you really tends to follow. But I digress. Yeah, when I started to feel this comic technique could be for someone else, no one actually ever saw my revision comics until after the fact. And so it was more just internally. I just kind of felt, gosh, this could have really helped me had I known about it earlier. And I would love to make entertainment one day. And wouldn't it be cool if I could do it in a way that's maybe not so familiar to the world, and it comes in a whole new format? I've never heard of entertaining comics that focus on being entertaining before educational. Anything similar out there that I'd known about at the time. Always tried to go across it in this kind of preachy educational way. So like, I just thought, what if I used my approach where it was like literally an educational comic, but it was trying to be more like a comic than something like education. And so, yeah, a combination of knowing that I wanted to work in entertainment and in an area where I had a lot of creative say, and knowing that this really helped me and it could help other people. And that's what kind of drove me to keep this in the back of my mind, thinking this could really help other people one day. And sure enough, it stayed. And 2016, Dekko Comics was born.
You make that sound super easy. You just like, one day I'm like, I've done a comic and here's my company code. Clearly it's not that. It's simple, is it?
Well, no, I mean, especially starting a business, and all that, there's a lot of complexity to that. But in all things considered, I've probably had it quite easy compared to some. Like, making a comic and selling it is quite, as long as you know how to draw and you know how to work with other people and artists, that's fairly DIY. That's fairly, for me at least, it seems quite straightforward. But if someone was to start something a lot more expensive and ambitious, like something selling computers or an initiative that would sell food or whatever, that's a much bigger undertaking. So I'm like, because my business is small and I keep it a small team, it's not as terrifying as maybe it could be if I was working with big investors or anything like that. Yeah.
So let's sort of walk through a kind of like the nuts and bolts of how things work. So if you're going to do a new issue of Dekko, and how do you make that work? I'm kind of thinking you're going to do a subject of whatever it is. You picked a subject. How do you transform that into a comic that then goes out to children? What's the kind of, do you do a load of research and learn it, or how does it come to be?
So basically, there's a variety of reasons why, since Dekko Comics issue 12, we've not been releasing many new of the educational curriculum Dekkos. We have released other material so far. We certainly did a lot of material for other companies and organizations where we turn their education or their messages into comics and animations. And we have released, Dekko Comics Mental Health and Dekko Comics, Dekko Drawing, which teaches how to draw. But part of it is because issues 1 to 12 covers the Key Stage 2 curriculum quite neatly and nicely, at least when it comes to maths and English and a smattering of the other stuff. Well, in science, it covers quite well as well. But the other thing is, it's to keep doing that. One, costs money. Like I said, there's a variety of reasons. But it also requires a certain amount of organization as well, because you have to make sure you've got a paid educational specialist to verify your information. It's not enough just to have the textbook open and take your information from there and make a comic out of it. You need some informed body to be ticking the boxes and making sure it's coming across right. So in the early days when we were making Dekko Comics, we had, I say the early days, between 2016 to 2018, we were working with HarperCollins for a lot of it.
Yeah.
And they had an educationalist team, so it was very easy to get them to verify the information and give us the feedback. And but for the first 3 issues, we didn't have that. So how we did it with that is I literally just reached out to professors and teachers and people who were qualified to verify some of this information. And we just did it like that. But it was quite messy and it was quite complicated. So if I was to make a new Dekko comic, I would make sure we had an educationalist on board. And we were working from the curriculum, the latest curriculum guide. And, we just had that system set up so that, we had the backbone all ready to go. Then once we've got that, though, when it comes to turning the information in to an entertaining story, for me, that's easy peasy and really fun.
Your dyslexic strength, yes.
Because it's fun to whittle down, like, first of all, how much information you can fit in 2 pages or whatever.
Yeah.
But I always come at it with either what's a fun story and how can I link it to this information, or, right, we've got this information, how can I make a fun story out of it? And it's what I try and teach school pupils, young and old, in my workshops. I try and teach them how you can do this with yourself. If you tune into that mindset of how do I make this as fun as possible for myself? For me, the rest is pretty easy after that, because as long as you know how to make stories and you find it fun to make stories and characters, there's so many possibilities. And I get a great sense of satisfaction out of making a story that works and making a character set dialogue that works and making the information come across in a way that's really informative and yet feels really fun. I feel like I fail if it involves too much wordy information. If the story is just filled with too much straightforward explanations and not enough story and jokes and whatever, that's less appealing to me. So I always try and make sure it's as entertaining as anything that Beano could throw at you.
Yeah. So how do you convert maths into a comic strip? That was one that spiked my interest when you mentioned the subjects you've covered.
You can look through the Dekko Comics to see examples, because we have 3 maths stories in every Dekko comic issue. But there's lots of ways. Like, for example, the times table. One of our stories is we have an inventor kid who loves to invent things. And he can't be bothered taking out the rubbish one day, and he invents a machine that can eat garbage.
Right.
And it's just one of these things where for every bag he eats, it powers his 4 batteries inside that power him. So, like, it's one of these things where he eats 1 bag and it powers the 4 batteries and it creates 4 power volts. But unfortunately, what he does is he starts going out of hand. Suddenly the robot eats 2 bags and it powers the 4 power volts. So it's basically like 4 times 2.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it gives them 8 power vaults, which the robot wasn't built for. And suddenly the robot starts evolving and gets more monstrous and crazy. And the story is about the robot sort of getting out of hand and getting bigger and crazier as it eats more and more bin bags sort of thing, you know. But there's that, and there's, you know, if you just make the maths part of the story in some way or another, it really is quite simple after that.
Yeah, when you said it's such an elegant solution. That I was like, yeah, eat 1 bag, 4 batteries, and then obviously it could be 8 times. And it's like, of course, but it's having that, connecting the two things, but directly you've done it, you can just go mad.
But you want to throw in the curveballs that you would see in a story. Like, for example, you know, you can have a moment where he is about to eat his 5th bin bag and they manage to stop him. But then all of a sudden, some angry old woman is throwing her bin bag out of the window and it goes into the robot's mouth by accident, you know, sort of thing. So you always want to keep the nuances and the twists and turns of a story in there. You don't want it just to be, oh no, and now he's eating another one. Oh no, and now he's eating another one. You know, 'cause otherwise the story becomes bland, you know? So always treat it like it's a theme and material for the story, not as a checklist that you've just got to make sure you've mentioned.
And of course, you want the visual. I'm thinking of the visuals that stick in people's brains. If it's the same visual for 2 versus 4 versus 6, then you just forget it, don't you? Where, like, as you said, like 5's the old lady throwing it in its mouth. And you're like, oh, yes, I remember that. Yeah,
absolutely. Because it's like a robot evolving. The robot like looks different for every answer as well. So
of course,
again, distinct visuals for every answer.
Yeah, and you sort of sat an exam and you can, I don't know, 5 times 8, and you can just visualize the massive robot. Well, that's this then. That is really cool. I like the idea of that and bolting the imagery together. Really, I'm sort of. I don't know if you ever had these at school. Do you remember the horrible history books at all? They were
yes.
It's kind of it feels similar to that, where they just make. I remember doing the Romans. It's just to make it as sort of silly as possible with how they're walking through how the Roman Empire come about, as how these books worked, and they're good fun. I can even sort of visualize some of it now with the Tudors and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, the testament to horrible histories is how popular they are. You know, like kids who struggle with learning about these things seem to have picked them up and enjoyed reading them. And it's inspired a whole industry of horrible histories material, including a TV show on CBBC.
Yes. Yeah. I was surprised when I saw that recently. Like, wow, that used to be just a book series that a few of us read, right? And now it's everywhere. Yeah. One thing I sort of noticed while having a review of your website was you've got a list of sort of characters that you have in all your series.
Oh, yeah.
How did they come about? Are they based on anything in particular?
Okay, so I've got a big, goofy, wacky, cartoony style. So everyone in that character roster looks a little bit goofy to some degree or another. But it's a weird thing. Half of them, at least, maybe even more than half, are all very personal. Like they just come from different parts of my life. Like, for example, Basil and Ernie, the 2 sort of like poster boy old men, they were from my very first Modern Studies revision comic.
Yeah.
And so were delights such as Carl, the constipated tadpole, and Pee-wee, the posh kiwi bird, and all these things. You know, there are other things like Timbot, the little round robot character. He featured in a little personal top trumps game I made. So that's where he came from. Detective Duke came from comics I used to make with my sister when I was younger. So a lot of them just come from characters that I've grown up with. But there were a few that I invented specifically for the purpose of Dekko, you know, particularly a lot of the Dekko kid characters. So Max, Inventor Boy, Gamer Girl, Tracy Time, Outlaura. They were all characters that I made specifically for Dekko, particularly as we had a young audience. I wanted to make sure that, you know, even though a lot of my characters were wacky, we did have some child audience characters in there. And there's more I want to make. There is more I want to make. I want to make a set of characters of a sort of Star Trek-esque comic of where all the inhabitants of this giant spaceship are vegetables. And, you know, like they try and invade planets with like little pea drones that they fire out of robotic pea pods, and the commander can be this big grumpy radish looking character. Oh, I don't know, but there's just a lot of wacky, silly scenarios you can come up with it all.
It sounds like the sky's the limit, and you can just find more curriculum to bolt to these characters. Do you have? You obviously got the roster, so when you're thinking of a story, do you like this person's going to appear, or does it just sort of flow out of you and you just add them in as they come in?
I mean, I do let them stew in my mind, and I think about them for a while, and I don't just sort of come up with one on the cuff and then suddenly include it, So I do have a little think about them, and but I guess once production starts, it's just kind of fast and furious in terms of how I start coming up with the first story. Because you don't know what kind of story you're going to make until you know what kind of educational information you're going to put in there.
Yeah.
I have to make sure it's a character that I feel I can go to lots of places with. So, like, even for example, it's easy to think about where someone like I've got a character called Ricky Rhino, who's like a business swindling rhinoceros, and just like that. His whole shtick is trying to con other sentient animal characters out of their money in Africa. So there's great there's so many funny scenarios and daft scenarios you can come up with that kind of character. But with someone who's more plain, like Max, who's just a young boy with glasses, you can still come up with a lot of material with that, because his sort of neutrality creates a lot of openness for the kind of stories that you can use him for. So yeah, I don't want to make a character who's so specific that you can only make one kind of story out of them, if that makes sense.
Yes, I get that. Yeah, rather than inventing a character that fits this particular story and you never ever use them again, it's nice to pick from a collection of characters that you can make the story fit to. And I imagine it also opens up opportunities to go places with the story to make it fit that character.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier on you started doing work for sort of outside companies and things. How are you finding that compared to doing your own series?
So that's good. I mean, you said earlier the sky's the limit for creating comics, and what I thought immediately in my head after that is like, no, money's the limit.
Yeah.
It is unfortunately a hamper when you're doing something independently. You do have to finance your own business, and publishing is a small margins business, which means you have to do other things too.
Right.
Unless you've got thousands and thousands of books under your belt and a distribution network, you aren't going to be able to make enough profit on its own. So most of our money comes from the workshops I run or from the comics I do for other organizations. And it is great. I love working with an excited, creative, ambitious client who wants to make something that really connects with their audiences and really gets across an important message to them, but with the focus of doing it in a just as fun and engaging a way as Dekko does. And some are actually very open to like how wacky you can go with it, but generally I find it's a bit more controlled, and you can understand because they have their brand to think about, they have their image they're wanting to portray, the emotion they're wanting to create with their customers. But it's still great fun. We've made some amazing stories, some funny stories, some serious stories, and some really beautiful art with a lot of these clients. We must have about over 30 comics under our belt now that we've made with these kind of clients. And we've just recently started opening animations as well, because there's a lot you can do with the video format. But I always say I prefer making my own stuff because it's got such creative range and freedom. But at the same time, it's kind of a nice relief when you're working with a client that you don't need to worry about marketing this or selling it. They can take all that off your hand. And if I could just make a comic and then it would just go out to thousands of people, that would be perfect.
Let you do what you do well and get other people to sort the rest of it out. So it went
absolutely.
Are you still mainly the illustrator and the story creator, or because you've got a small team, do any of them also input on that?
Yes. So the team you see on the website is not like the team that are actively working all the time, because we've always been a freelance team. So at different points, we've had social media managers or researchers or, lots and lots of artists. But because we're a small independent company, without much investment in the initial stages, we've just always been sort of working with people when work is available and here, and which works for them, for the people we're working with, because we don't want to get them into an employee situation and then there's not enough money to pay them, sort of thing. Yeah. So everyone on that team is, and it doesn't even include everyone. We still need to add on to it, but it's anyone who's worked with us for a significant amount of time and is considered part of the Dekko team, the Dekko freelance network, which we, keep in the loop. But our team was 16 strong at one point, in total, including the artists and the managers and admin and all that stuff. But now we have one sort of employee who's my administrator, Tegan. She does an amazing job, and the rest are freelance. And so we've got one sort of guy who's helping us with freelance administration and so on. But the rest are artists. And so currently we have an active network of about, I'd say, 7 artists, which again isn't the full network, but it's just the one that we're sort of actively working with right now. And that's kind of how it works.
I think you probably need to be like that as a small business, don't you? Being agile with how your staff are on, well, not your staff, your freelance sort of network grows and contracts depending on how workload is with the business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what I thought I'd do is we'll start rounding out this podcast, and I have 3 rapid fire questions I ask every guest who comes on the podcast. They are quick questions from me, but they don't necessarily need quick answers from yourself. So my first one is, what prejudice have you had about dyslexia that has been proven wrong?
I've had, I guess, prejudices about myself having dyslexia. I used to think it was probably only back in my primary school years, but that it was something to do with stupidity, or just a defunct brain, and that's been proven wrong based on just how much I've been able to achieve for one, but also that I was able to make my schoolwork work, and also that I found that when I was more confident, I was doing better at all kinds of things. And a lot of the comments of stupidity that came from pupils in high school often came from symptoms of the lack of confidence. Because I was lacking confidence, I would often say, I'd be extra paranoid about what I was saying. And I could stumble over my own words and say something that sounded stupider than I was actually intending. Or I could, it could just make me nervous, and I could sort of be going again and again. It just feeds into that image of, what they're putting together in their heads. This person's struggling at schoolwork. They barely have anything to say socially, and they must be a bit slow. And it's really frustrating because it still affects me to this day. Like, still, I can often ask people to repeat themselves a lot when they're talking. Which there's nothing wrong with my hearing, but again, it's a processing thing. Like, I haven't pieced together exactly what the sentence was, or different versions of what they could have said have come to my brain at once, and I just need to ask them to repeat again, because it's like, I'm pretty sure you didn't just say, I think my nose is a brush. I'm pretty sure you just said, I think I'm in a rush. I just need to verify that just to make sure I've not missed anything. But that's still, I'm aware that to certain people and in certain situations, asking people to repeat, particularly if it's in a noisy room, that might make me appear slow to some people. That might be, but I'm definitely away from that prejudice now. It's nothing to do with slowness. It's often quite the opposite. Particularly, another prejudice was coming at the wrong end of things. Like, people are talking about something and then I say something, but I've picked up something wrong in the conversation. I've come at it from a different angle. I used to think that was something wrong with me. And actually, I think that's quite good out of the box thinking now, and a good way for original thinking. The prejudices I used to have, I've never been negative about dyslexia, to be honest, but the prejudices I used to have about my mind just kind of being useless and slow are gone.
Cool. Yes. And I think once you learn a bit more about being dyslexic and particularly stuff that works for you, it is quite good to lose some of the baggage maybe that comes with how you think you should be versus how you are. And actually, these things balance out as well. So my next quick question is, if an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
I would say, hey, Mr. Alien, or Mrs. Alien, or whatever kind of alien you identify as. I am a human, and humans are a really interesting race because we come with lots of different minds and different ways of thinking about things. And some of us are naturally good swimmers, naturally good drawers, and naturally good writers, and so on. And as a result, might also find other things a bit more difficult than others. We're a world that does a lot of reading because that comes from our history. And not all of us are naturally as fast as that as the others, or are naturally as adept as that as other people. So that is what dyslexia is. People who might struggle with skills specifically to do with reading and spelling and writing on that particular skill. But it's not that they can't get better at it, and it's not that there's anything wrong with them. It's just a slight difficulty in that area, and we've given a name to it because so much of our world focuses around that. But, we're also a changing and learning world, and that's not always going to be a problem forever. Enjoy your visit.
Enjoy your visit. No, that's really cool. I like the way you described that, and that's really interesting. So, my last sort of question, really, and seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favourite dyslexia life hack? And I know you're going to say read comics. Think of another one.
I came prepared for this one, didn't I?
Yeah, you did indeed.
I think, it is one of the best ones that has got me through a lot of my life, which is turning it into something that you prefer. But I wouldn't say it has to be comics or drawings. Turning it into comics and drawings definitely did help me for the revision context, and it's helped me for little bits and bobs of other things. I also think reading comics in general has been good because it's boosted my confidence with reading.
Yes.
But I also think audiobooks are excellent for that.
Yeah.
I can't recommend them enough. There are so many people who would love learning all that vocabulary and learning all those amazing stories that can come from listening to a book, where, because the problem with reading a book, if you're someone who struggles with reading, it just becomes the effort outweighs the fun of the experience. It just becomes, it's taking too long, it's too uncomfortable, and you're just not getting into the story enough. And this is a story that can grab you. Audiobooks can bypass that, because even if you don't follow every single scrap of it, you can get to the meat of it. And, it helps you get interested faster. And as soon as you're hooked, everything about the story becomes easier to follow. The other thing is that I'd like to say is a great life hack is, again, on sort of helping with memorization front. But, using other things, other forms of entertainment, like music, for example, singing things that I need to remember to my favorite tunes really helps. It really, really helps. So that's a great hack too. I would say for any dyslexia hacks, look to sensory stuff, look to entertainment, and look to whatever you feel comfortable and confident with.
Yeah, most definitely. Right, before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, or where can people find you?
People can find me, they can find me on LinkedIn, for one thing. But you can find Dekko Comics at www.dekkocomics.com. That's DEKKO for Dekko Comics. And you'll find a bunch of free material on there that you can observe and see what it's like. You can buy printed material that we post to your door. We sell not just all across the UK, but also internationally now, including Australia, America, New Zealand. We have school packs for schools for ones who want to use it in their classrooms or libraries. We have an online subscription system where you can, for just £2.99, you can get access to all of our content online at any time where you have internet. And we've also got some extra bits and bobs on the website for you to look at too, including answers to the puzzles on the puzzle pages. Ooh. So it's all happening at the Dekko website. But do get in touch, and And if you're someone or you know someone that would like a comic or animation made of your educational information or message, we're always down for that too. So give us a buzz.
Cool. And I will link to all of that in the show notes as well.
Fantastic.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me this evening. And it's been quite cool hearing about this, another great alternative method to teach dyslexic people, and I guess non-dyslexic people, subjects they're struggling with.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Matt.
No worries at all. And I want to thank everybody else for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye for now.